Hello, my name is Bermet Talant. I'm a reporter here at the Kyiv Post. Today on the podcast, we are highlighting some of the most interesting stories from September. Coming up on the program, secrecy blankets corruption in Ukraine's defense sector. The list of judges to the new Supreme Court of Ukraine has been announced. New education bill raises anger and fears for minority rights. Let's start. Since Russia's war broke out in 2014, Ukraine has been spending more money on its defense sector than ever. This year, the country has spent a record $5 billion on security and defense. But how much of it is well spent is an open question. Almost all defense purchases are still conducted in secrecy. Journalists revealed some controversial purchases, showing the defense ministry and its enterprises bought overpriced equipment or overpaid by tens of thousands of dollars to firms linked to top officials, including President Petro Poroshenko. Kyiv Post editor Ewan MacDonald is here to talk about corruption in Ukraine's defense sector. Welcome, Ewan.
Hello.
What kind of secret and corrupt deals did journalists discover?
Well, there have been some cases of tank engines being sold. They were taken from old tanks, basically, and sold as new engines in the Lviv tank factory. There have been other cases of armoured cars and land cruisers being bought for one price and then sold at an inflated price to the Ukrainian armed forces. And so these things go on all the time, apparently, according to some lawmakers, but they can't discuss, they can't tell us exactly what's going on because it's a secret, as are most of the deals that seem to be going on in the defense ministry at the moment.
Why is that? Is that because the country is at war?
Yes, they say it's because the country is at war, and if they give out too much information, it could help the enemy. They've even made the number of socks they buy a secret because that could give the Russians some idea about how many servicemen are ready to go on fighting. And of course that means that there is very probably some corruption going on. Ukraine has increased its defence spending remarkably over the last few years. It used to be around 1.5% of GDP. In 2015 it went up to 5%. Next year it's going to go up to 6.4 billion, or 6.3 I think. And so that there's a huge amount of money going into defence now, obviously, because Ukraine is at war, and it's gone up vastly over the last few years. But the money goes into a sort of dark tunnel, and what's supposed to come out at the end is lovely new equipment for the army, but it doesn't seem to be coming out. The soldiers at the front are still complaining about shortages, although it has got better, must be said. There is some money getting through, but it's almost certain that some of it is being siphoned off.
On one hand, we have national security, but on the other hand, there is a long history of corruption in state procurement in Ukraine. Is it possible to find a balance between transparency and still protecting national interests?
Obviously, it would be a lot easier if Ukraine wasn't at war. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be much we can do apart from just try and monitor what's going on as best we can, and see how if we can work out how the money has been spent, if it has been spent well. And you can do that only really by looking at how the soldiers are provided for at the front. You can listen to their concerns and see what is missing.
Just a few days ago, we witnessed how fire destroyed two largest ammunition depots on the Kyiv military base. Was it a result of sabotage or mere negligence?
Well, the previous explosion, which occurred in Kharkiv Oblast in March, was immediately called sabotage. Apparently there was a drone that dropped a grenade, but that's never been proved. And also there were the same claims made this time at Kalinivka. These cases have happened before regularly, and not just when Ukraine was at war. Although there have been claims immediately that this was due to sabotage. But we know that in 2003, for instance, there was a huge explosion in a depot in Kharkiv Oblast because the soldiers there were cutting up scrap metal to sell. And the ammunition was set off by a welding torch. There's also been explosions due to hot weather, setting off badly stored munitions. A stray cigarette end even has set off, caused fires which have then spread to munitions and caused explosions, fast explosions. At one site in Bogdanivka, I think, Nova Bogdanivka, in Zaporizhia Oblast, there were incidents from 2004 to 2007 every year. It's much more likely that it was negligence than a Russian sabotage unit operating well behind lines in secret. Well, the former commander of the Kalinivka depot was actually prosecuted for negligence because part of the money that was supposed to have been spent on fire equipment seems to have gone missing. Or rather, the money was supposed to have been spent, but the fire equipment somehow never turned up.
Thanks a lot, Ewan. Have a great day. We're moving on. The High Council of Justice announced the list of judges to the new Supreme Court. 111 out of 120 passed. Most of them are experienced judges. Many have dubious reputations. Kyiv Post reporter Oleg Sukhov has been closely watching the judicial reform and joins us here. Welcome, Oleg.
Hello.
You reported that some candidates to the Supreme Court who did not meet professional and ethical standards got in anyway. Who are they?
Basically, 25 of the Supreme Court appointees have been vetoed by the Public Integrity Council. It's a civil society body that oversees judicial reform. They were vetoed because they do not meet professional and ethical standards, are deemed corrupt or dishonest. So some of them are top judges who are believed to be very close to the political leadership. So one of them is Lvov, who is head of the High Commercial Court, and he's very controversial because he's been investigated in a criminal case against Pavlo Grichkivsky, a member of the High Council of Justice. This case is related to bribery. He's also been investigated in a case linked to a former High Commercial Court judge Tatskov and another High Commercial Court judge Yemelyanov. So Tatskov and Yemelyanov are believed to be symbols of Yanukovych-era corruption. So another very controversial candidate is Nastavny, and Nastavny and his colleague Slinko were involved in the political persecution of Lutsenko. He was an opposition politician under President Yanukovych, now he's prosecutor general. So this case is recognized as political by Ukrainian and European authorities, but nonetheless he was appointed a judge of the Supreme Court. So there are also some controversial judges linked to the People's Front Party. There are also people who lied on their declarations, who were trying to hide their assets, who were involved in other political cases. So one of the judges, Bernazyuk, is linked to the People's Front Party. Several of the judges used to work at a company co-owned by Alexei Filatov, who is Deputy Chief of Staff for Poroshenko. And there are many, actually, connections between Poroshenko, his associates, and the new Supreme Court judges, some of them at least.
So current judicial reform is the brainchild of President Poroshenko, and civil organizations claim that it was designed in a way that it left room for indirect manipulations.
So one of the problems with the Supreme Court competition is that basically the High Qualification Commission and the High Council of Justice, which are the supreme judicial bodies, basically almost never explained the motivation of their decisions. So it's basically impossible to verify and explain the decisions that they made. So nobody knows that because the recommendations on the nominating specific judges that the High Qualification Commission published are basically empty. They do not contain any motivation. And actually they were only published very recently. And before that, the Commission had refused to publish them, and it was not clear at all why they made specific decisions. Another problem is that they never explained their methodology, and they changed their methodology. As a result, a lot of candidates who did not get a sufficient score were nominated for the Supreme Court. It was more transparent than under Yanukovych, for example, but that's also one of the reasons why we can see so many flaws and so many problems with that competition. And I also wanted to say that basically, like, members of the Public Integrity Council actually doubt that what has happened can actually be called a competition. Because a competition is something with a set of clear rules, with clear methodology, and when you can verify all the stages and the results. While in this case, we don't know the methodology, we don't know any clear rules, so it seems that all these appointments were made not based on the competition itself, but based on some, behind-the-door deals, some arrangements that we have not seen.
This was our reporter, Oleg Sukhov. Thanks for stopping by. You can read more on Ukraine's ongoing judicial reform in our special supplement, Legal Quarterly. It came out on Friday, September 29. In Ukraine, public schools in areas densely populated with ethnic minorities offer free education in minority languages. But starting next year, Ukrainian will become the main language of instruction in all schools. A new law on education was signed this week, and Ukraine's neighbors, Hungary and Romania, are not happy with it, saying it restricts the rights of ethnic minorities to study in their national languages. Hungarian foreign minister even threatened to block and veto Ukraine's path towards the European Union. Kyiv Post editor Olga Rudenko is here to tell us more about the conflict. Hi, Olga.
Hi.
So, Olga, what changes in Ukraine's education system with the new law that was signed this week?
So, a lot of small things changed, but there was one norm that got everyone talking. It was about languages, and the thing is that up to now Ukraine had a very liberal policy regarding languages in school. So if you are a minority and living in the place where there's a lot of people of your minority, then you could be getting school education in your language. So you could be living in Ukraine and be a Hungarian and not know Ukrainian language at all and go to public school and get free education in your language in Hungarian, and all the subject would be taught you in Hungarian. And now with this new law, what changes is they are actually making all the public schools shift to Ukrainian language of education. And what it means is that if you are, say, a Russian-speaking child, you would now be going to Ukrainian school, but you still have your language taught in your school, so you'll have several classes of Russian a week, for example, several classes of Hungarian or whatever. And it is allowed for a couple classes to be taught in a different language than Ukrainian, but it can only be a language of European Union. So yeah, that is a big shift from the liberal policy that we used to have.
So it means that Russian-speaking children will not be able to get education in Russian language?
Not for free, but they can go to a private school. There's plenty of private schools that teach in Russian and other languages in Ukraine, so there's still this option. You can go to private school, and if you choose to go to public school, which is absolutely free for you, then you have to study in Ukrainian, but you also have an option to learn your language, Russian. You have Russian classes.
Why is it important to unify the language of school education?
So we've seen that it can bring severe consequences for the whole nation if the nation is not unified around one language. And I think it makes perfect sense for the government to make this move and to sort of push everyone a little bit to know in Ukrainian.
So a lot of parents, especially those living in Russian-speaking cities of Ukraine, they expressed some fears. And I know that you grew up in a Russian-speaking city and studied in Ukrainian language school. What was your experience of growing in bilingual environment?
Well, that is why I have a strong opinion about this, because I know firsthand that it's not a problem for a Russian-speaking child to go to Ukrainian school. And I see all these parents around Ukraine, especially, of course, in eastern regions and southern regions, who are panicking over this law. They think that if they send their Russian-speaking child to a Ukrainian school, then the child will not, do good in the future, which is ridiculous because, you've seen all the studies proving that speaking two languages on a daily basis is actually good for you. It's good for, especially for a child, it helps develop, the child's abilities. And it is really strange that somebody would protest that, especially since it's not it really is very easy for a Russian-speaking person to learn Ukrainian and vice versa.
Thanks a lot for your opinion, Olga.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for today. To read more of the stories discussed on this podcast, visit KyivPost.com. A new issue is out every Friday, and if you like our work, please subscribe at KyivPost.com/subscription. Почуємось.